Chapter 1. The Scholar's Secret. Beneath the spired silhouette of the University of Nuln, as winter's final breath exhaled frost upon cobbled streets, a candle burned low in a cramped, dust-cloaked chamber. The room was a scholar's tomb, cluttered with parchment scrolls, worn tomes, and the peculiar scent of dry ink and mildew. Shadows danced on the ceiling like ancient spirits summoned by the flicker of that solitary flame. Theodor Hartwig leaned over his desk, a haggard figure hunched beneath the weight of obsession. His spectacles, cracked at the rim, slipped down his nose as his ink-stained fingers traced the archaic script carved into a jagged piece of sandstone. The air was still, save for the whisper of turning pages and the occasional pop from the fireplace, which sputtered against the icy drafts crawling under the door. He mumbled the words again, his breath misting in the cold. When the seventh star aligns with the serpent's fang, the crownless shall awaken, and the dust shall reign anew. He sat back, heartbeat drumming. The fragment matched the verse found in the Book of Exile, a forbidden tome stored in the restricted section of the Grand Library, access granted only by deception and a forged seal. Weeks had passed since he'd discovered the stone, delivered by a black market antiquities trader whose body was later found in the Rake River, throat torn open and eyes boiled in their sockets. Theodor had kept the shard hidden, concealed beneath false flooring in his desk, far from the prying eyes of his colleagues and the inquisitorial auditors who prowled the university like carrion crows. He pulled out a thick, battered volume, Treatise on the Southern Dustlands, penned by the disgraced explorer Otto von Sabel. Maps unfurled like the wings of some ancient beast, revealing the lifeless expanse of Nehekhara, the land of the dead. At its heart, encircled in red ink, was a place marked only as Akhet Ka, the throne of bones. A sudden knock shattered the silence. Theodor leapt, heart in his throat. He slammed the book shut and kicked the floorboard over the sandstone shard, scattering loose papers across the floor. The door creaked open. A figure entered, Professor Gerlich, his owl-eyed mentor turned adversary. His face was gaunt, skin like parchment, eyes sharp with suspicion. "You've been in here for days, Theodor. Students whisper that you've been dabbling." "I'm researching," Theodor said, voice tight. "There's a pattern in the Nehekharan star charts, cycles that mirror—" "Enough!" Gerlich's voice cracked like a whip. "Nehekhara is a grave. Dig too deep and you'll find more than bones. The priests of Mor will not protect you from what lies in the sand." Then, softer, almost a whisper, "Whatever you're chasing, bury it." With a final glance, Gerlich turned and left. Theodor's eyes lingered on the now closed door, and his breath caught in his lungs. He hadn't mentioned stars. How had Gerlich known? That night, Theodor couldn't sleep. He tossed in sweat-drenched sheets, dreams writhing with visions of golden sarcophagi, screaming mummies, and a colossal figure with a serpent's crown standing amidst a storm of ash. He awoke with a gasp, choking on phantom sand. He lit the candle again and retrieved the shard. Under the flickering light, the prophecy's final line revealed itself, previously invisible beneath layers of age and grime, now unveiled by the candle's warmth. The letters glowed faintly, not of ink, but of seared magic. Only the bloodless air may break the veil. Before he could ponder its meaning, the window shattered. A dark figure burst through, shrouded in a cloak stitched with glyphs that pulsed with arcane light. The intruder's face was hidden behind a jackal's mask, eyes glowing emerald with malignant fury. Theodor barely had time to duck as a curved blade whispering through the air sliced across the room. Books exploded into confetti as the intruder struck again, slashing a nearby shelf in two. Sparks flew from enchanted steel striking iron brackets. With a desperate scream, Theodor grabbed a fireplace poker and swung blindly. The blow connected with a sickening crack, shattering the jackal mask. The attacker staggered, revealing a face not of flesh but mummified horror, skin stretched and cracking, teeth like yellowed needles, tongue writhing with curses from a long-dead age. The creature lunged. They collided with the desk, smashing through the false floorboard. The stone shards skittered across the ground. The attacker snatched it, hissing a curse in Nehekhara. But Theodore, now frenzied, drove the poker through the undead throat. With a gurgle it reared back, and he seized a candle and flung it into the creature's face. The flame caught. The ancient wrappings ignited like dry parchment. A howl split the night, inhuman and deafening. Fire consumed the intruder, who stumbled back into the shattered window and fell 2 stories to the courtyard below in a blaze of shrieking embers. Smoke choked the chamber. Alarms rang across the campus. But Theodore stood unmoving, staring at the shard now glowing in the firelight, a single word etched where once there had been none. Awake. He clutched it to his chest and whispered, trembling, "Nehekhara, I'm coming." Chapter 2. Prophecy of the 7 Stars. The morning sun was a pale smear in the sky, choked by low-hanging fog and soot from the countless chimneys of Nuln. Bells tolled in mourning for the fire that had gutted a wing of the university hours before. A tragic accident, the professors claimed. An overheated hearth, perhaps. Nothing more. But Theodore Hardwig knew better. He stood on the iron bridge overlooking the wreck, his face pale, eyes hollow. He'd spent the night in hiding, moving between student lodgings and abandoned chapels, keeping out of sight as city watchmen investigated the incident. Somewhere deep in his coat, the shard of sandstone pulsed with a warmth that wasn't from the sun. He could feel it, like a heartbeat, like it was waiting. He glanced to his left. A figure in a rust-colored cloak approached, their limp barely visible beneath heavy boots. It was Jakob Veltz, a former soldier turned drunkard, now part-time smuggler and occasional guide. He stank of cheap spirits and brimstone. "You look like you saw more himself," Jakob grunted. "I saw worse," Theodore whispered, handing him a folded parchment. "I need passage out of Nuln, quietly, southbound." Jakob unfolded it, squinting. "Through the Black Gulf? Into the desert?" Nehekhara. Jakob blinked. "You trying to die slow or fast?" Theodore said nothing. His stare, sharp and fevered, answered for him. Later that day, beneath the clamor of the dockside, they met their first contact, a Tylean captain named Serafina Morelli. Her ship, the Scarlet Hound, was moored between rusting barges and sleek elven clippers. Unlike them, her vessel bore scars, burnt wood, patched sails, and a figurehead with a shattered jaw. Serafina chewed a root between her teeth as Theodore spoke of ancient ruins and forgotten bloodlines. She listened in silence, arms folded. "I don't ferry archaeologists," she said, "especially not ones being hunted. I'll pay triple, and I need muscle." At the sound of coin clinking, her eyes lit up. "Muscle I can do." They left at dusk. Their vessel creaked as it cut through murky waters, sails swollen by cold winds. Theodore stayed below deck, hunched over a cracked table, maps and relics sprawled before him. He had gathered what little he could: scrolls from illicit dealers, rubbings from forgotten altars, a ring bearing the cobra sigil of Cetra's old enemies. But the centerpiece was the prophecy itself. He unfurled a vellum scroll, the ink faded and smelling of blood. It bore 7 stars drawn in a circle, with Nehekhara runes between each. Theodore translated aloud, voice trembling. 7 stars shall shine where none remain. Beneath the serpent's stare and vulture's bane. From tomb to throne the dead shall rise. and mortal bones shall crown the skies. As he whispered the final verse, the shard in his pocket warmed again, searing this time, burning into his thigh like molten iron. He yelped, wrenching it free. It now bore a new mark, a crescent moon bisected by a jagged line, glowing with faint green phosphorescence. Suddenly a scream tore through the hull. The ship shuddered. Theodore burst onto the deck into a cacophony of shouted commands and splintering wood. A thick fog had rolled in, cloaking the vessel in ghostly white. Shapes moved within, wrong shapes. With a sickening crack, a sailor's body flew across the deck, ribs caved in, blood erupting from his mouth as he slammed into the mast. His eyes stared blankly, blood oozing from the sockets. From the mist they emerged. Embalmed warriors, their eyes burning like coals, skin cracked and dry as ancient bark. They wore rusted bronze armor and carried curved blades inscribed with unholy hieroglyphs. One held a staff crowned with a jackal's skull, green fire flickering within. "Get below!" Jakob screamed, hacking at a desiccated arm that clutched the railing. Theodore froze, unable to move as one of the undead fixed its gaze on him. It spoke, a rasping, sand-choked growl in a dead tongue. As it raised its blade, Theodore instinctively held out the shard. The creature recoiled as if struck, its blade trembled in its grip. Then came the gunfire. Seraphina emerged from the quarterdeck, twin pistols roaring. One undead's head exploded in a spray of blackened ichor and shards of bone, slumping backward into the sea. Another took a shot to the chest and staggered, flailing as Jakob plunged his blade deep into its spine with a crunch that echoed over the crashing waves. The undead hissed, retreating. The mist seemed to coil protectively around them, then swallowed their forms as quickly as they'd come. Silence. The deck was soaked in blood and oil. 3 crewmen lay dead, one missing his arm, another bisected at the waist. The last gasped wetly as Theodore approached, clutching his ruined throat. Eyes. So many. Eyes. He croaked before dying. The shard in Theodore's hand had stopped glowing. Seraphina stood over the carnage, reloading without emotion. "You want to keep going into that cursed land of yours, Professor?" Theodore nodded slowly. He could feel it now, deep in his marrow. The sands were already shifting. Something had awoken. The scarlet hounds sailed on into the darkness, carrying them toward the land where gods had died and kings had risen from the grave. Chapter 3. The Forbidden Lecture. The lecture hall of the University of Nuln was a sanctum of order and rationality, its high stone walls lined with iron sconces and the cracked busts of long-dead scholars. Dust drifted in golden shafts of morning light, cast through leaded windows too small to let in the chaos of the outside world. Here, truth was dissected with quills and discourse, not swords. But today truth wore a darker face. Theodore Hartwig stood at the lectern, his hands pale against the lacquered oak. Behind him blackboards were filled with scrawled glyphs, ancient Nehekharan pictograms so foreign they seemed to bleed into the air. The room was packed, students shifting in their seats, muttering, murmuring. Professors loomed in the front row like judges in a tribunal, and above them all, on the uppermost dais, sat High Rector Albrecht Koenig, a man carved from stone in scorn. Again, the rector growled. Theodore cleared his throat. He felt the shard in his coat pocket, hot and heavy like a brand. "I come not with theory," he began, his voice dry, trembling, "but with evidence. The Nehekharan prophecy, long dismissed as myth, foretells the rise of a new dynasty, one not of the living, but of those who once ruled the dead. A second awakening." Laughter rippled through the hall. Someone coughed, loudly. Theodore continued. This isn't theology. I have found a relic, an authentic prophecy shard carved in pre-classical hieroglyphs, infused with residual necromantic energy. It bears a celestial sequence, one matching the astral alignment due in less than a month. He pointed to a chart behind him, celestial bodies drawn in spirals. When the seventh star aligns with the serpent's fang, the veil between life and death thins. The Dynasty of Dust will rise again, led by a figure only known as the Bloodless Heir. A hand shot up, Professor Krieger, rheumy-eyed and sharp-tongued. "And tell us, Herr Hartwig, how many nights have you spent chasing ghosts in the fog? Was your assailant last week not enough?" "I was attacked for possessing this knowledge," Theodore snapped, his voice gaining heat. "Not by cultists, not by bandits, by something wrong. Undead. Sentient. It spoke Nehekhara and wielded magic. You know what that implies." Now the room stilled. Eyes flicked to one another. "Necromancy," someone muttered. Another added, "Impossible. The Tomb Kings don't leave Nehekhara." Theodore reached into his coat and drew the shard. Gasps filled the chamber. The sandstone gleamed unnaturally, glyphs burning faintly like coals beneath the surface. A tremor passed through the hall as if the air itself flinched. "I present this to the university as proof," he said, placing it on the pedestal. "And I request funding and recognition to launch an expedition to Nehekhara, the Throne of Bones." The silence that followed was thick as tar. Then came the voice of Rector Koenig, heavy with scorn. "You come before this institution with heresy in your hands and madness in your eyes. You seek to chase fairy tales while desecrating the legacy of this university. You bring a cursed stone." He stood, old bones creaking. "You are hereby stripped of your access to university resources. Your credentials are revoked, and should you be found trespassing on campus grounds again, you will be detained." Theodore's breath hitched. His heart thudded in his ears. "You can't." "Get out!" The words exploded from Koenig's mouth like a thunderclap. The air seemed to darken. Students shrank in their seats. A pair of wardens stepped from the shadows. Theodore grabbed the shard and backed away, eyes wide, betrayed. The weight of 1,000 stairs crushed him as he stumbled toward the exit, the echo of Koenig's voice chasing him into the hall. "Leave the dead to their dust." He didn't look back. Outside, the sky had darkened. Storm clouds rolled over the city like bruises blooming across the heavens. Thunder cracked. Theodore fled through alleys slick with rain and rot, heart pounding like a drum of war. He could feel it again, that invisible thread pulling at his mind, the shard burning like molten lead in his palm. Then, a shape moved in the rain. He stopped. Across the street, in the mouth of a crumbling alley, stood a man. No, not a man. Its face was a mask of gold, stylized like a hawk, the eyes empty black voids. Its robes shimmered with ancient script, and its hands ended in claws, curled around a staff tipped with a scorpion's tail. It raised the staff. With a scream, Theodore dove aside as green lightning ripped through the air. Cobblestones exploded. A wagon nearby shattered, flaming debris hurling into the sky. Pedestrians screamed, scattering. A guard ran forward, only to be blasted off his feet in a spray of burning bone. The creature advanced, slow, implacable. Theodore rolled to his feet and ran. He turned a corner and nearly collided with a cloaked figure holding a pistol to his face. "Down," the voice barked. Theodore hit the ground just as the pistol roared. The creature behind him let out a metallic shriek and vanished into a column of black smoke. When he looked up, Serafina stood over him, smoke trailing from her gun. "Told you," she said with a grin, helping him up. "Muscle I can do." He stared at her, panting. She cocked her head toward the south. "You ready?" Lightning flashed across the sky. Theodore nodded. "Nehekhara awaits." Chapter 4. Departure into Dust. Dawn came blood-red over the reek, the river boiling with mist as if stirred by unseen leviathans. Theodore stood at the bow of the Scarlet Hound, cloak whipping in the wind, eyes fixed south. Behind him, Nuln was reduced to jagged spires swallowed by smoke, its shrines and steeples reduced to silhouettes against a dying sky. The city had rejected him. But the desert was calling. Below deck, Jakob Veltz cursed while inspecting a rusted crate of provisions. His blade, a chipped falchion stained with old ichor, hung from his belt like a promise of violence. He turned as Theodore entered, motioning toward the cargo. "We've got salted pork, sour wine, and hard bread that could break a dwarf's jaw," he growled. "You'd better find your truth quick, scholar. Men die faster in the sands than they do on battlefields." Serafina Morelli was already on the deck, arms folded, her dark braid trailing behind her like a whip. She shouted orders in a rapid-fire blend of Tylean and Reichspiel, boots clanging on wood. The crew obeyed her not out of loyalty, but out of fear. She had earned that in blood. 3 days of hard sailing brought them to the Black Gulf, a churning expanse of salt and shadow. From there, they cut south, their sails billowed by harsh, dry winds that carried the scent of scorched bone. The sky changed above them, cloudless, vast, and cruel. Soon the coastline of Nehekhara came into view. It rose from the sea like the corpse of a god. Dunes like mountains, cliffs carved with skulls, and obelisks jutting skyward like jagged teeth. The shore was littered with the ribs of ancient ships and the bones of those who dared trespass. The ship anchored near a rocky outcrop known as the Widow's Fang, where a narrow path led inland. The heat hit them like a hammer, an oppressive dry weight that cracked lips and cooked flesh beneath armor and leather. Theodore, Jakob, Seraphia, and 6 hired hands, mercenaries from Astalia, Kislev, and Araby, descended the gangplank. They were armed to the teeth, crossbows, scimitars, pistols, and charms etched with Mars sigils. One wore a necklace of dried ears. Another chewed something black that reeked of opium. They moved inland, past skeletal trees and abandoned watchtowers. The silence was monstrous. No birds, no insects, only the wind whispering through dead stones. By nightfall they camped near the remains of a collapsed caravan. Tattered banners lay half buried in sand, bones scattered across rusted wheels and broken crates. Theodore examined a nearby skull. It bore bite marks too large for any human and too many teeth. "We're being watched," Jakob muttered, eyeing the dunes. He was right. The first attack came when the fire was low, the desert wind hissing over the embers. One of the mercenaries, a hulking Astalian named Cyril, wandered too far from the camp to piss. He didn't scream. A wet, tearing sound pierced the night. Something hit the sand with a dull thud. They found what was left of Cyril moments later. His body had been split open from groin to sternum, ribcage peeled like a fruit, organs missing. Blood soaked the sand in a black pool. His face was still twisted in confusion, as if he'd never had time to be afraid. Jakob drew steel. "Weapons! Now!" They formed a circle around the camp, torches raised. The sands shifted, once, twice, and then it came. A blur. The creature exploded from beneath the dunes, a jackal-headed horror, cloaked in rags and rotted bandages. Its claws were knives, its jaw too wide, rows of teeth glistening with black filth. It slammed into one of the mercenaries, pinning her with inhuman strength, and bit into her neck with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across the sand. Jakob lunged, hacking at its back. His blade bit deep, but the thing didn't howl. It turned, snarled, and struck him with a swipe that sent him tumbling, ribs cracking under the blow. Theodore fumbled for the shod in his satchel. It pulsed violently, the glyphs searing bright green. "Nekhotep," he shouted, words from the prophecy he barely understood. The creature stopped. Its eyes locked on him, eyes like shattered emeralds. Then it hissed, backing away, howling as if in agony. Smoke poured from its bandages. It dropped to its knees, claws clawing at its own face before erupting into green fire. The smell of incense and rot filled the air. When the light faded, only a scorched outline remained in the sand. Silence fell again. Jakob groaned, clutching his side. One of his ribs jutted from his skin like a broken spear. 2 others were dead. Serafina reloaded her pistols in silence, face stone cold. Theodore stared at the shard in his hands, now dull and lifeless again. "Hey, Martin." "Didn't it kill me?" he whispered. Serafina looked at him, eyes narrow. "It recognized something." He nodded slowly. "Haunted. Then we're getting close." Chapter 5. Tombs of the Crescent Moon. The desert swallowed the dead without mercy. They buried the fallen before dawn, heaping sand over the bodies in silence. The Estallion's skull had to be pried from his torso, his neck bent backwards in an unnatural twist. The other mercenary, the girl with the raven tattoo, was found torn in half near the camels. Her lower half had vanished into the dunes. Theodore recited a rite of Mor as the sun bled gold over the horizon. No one interrupted him. Even Jakob, his side wrapped in blood-soaked linens, bowed his head as the words passed into the burning air. Their numbers were 6 now. As the sun climbed, so did the temperature. It pressed on them like an anvil, hot enough to cook metal, to dry sweat before it could drip. They moved slowly, wrapped in cloth and dust, following Theodore's map toward a crescent-shaped canyon that loomed in the distance like a scar across the land. It was nearly midday when they reached it. The tombs of the Crescent Moon were exactly as the texts had described. Half-buried structures carved into sandstone cliffs, their faces worn by wind and centuries. Colossal statues of forgotten kings loomed from the walls, their mouths open in eternal screams. Some bore the heads of jackals, others of hawks or cobras, their eyes now hollow craters. Time had not taken them quietly. Theodore stepped forward, heart hammering. "This is it." Jakob spat. "Looks like Mor's own asshole." They entered the first tomb through a cracked gateway flanked by 2 broken obelisks. The air changed immediately, cooler, but thick. Every breath tasted of rot, like wet linen steeped in embalming oils and ancient blood. Their torches flickered as they descended. The walls bore murals depicting vast battles, skeletal legions clashing beneath black suns, sorcerer priests raising their arms as green lightning split the sky. Names were etched in gold but worn to nonsense. Only a single glyph remained unmarred, repeating again and again. Baboret. Theodore traced it with his fingers. The serpent that sleeps. He was buried here. They passed through narrow corridors lined with burial alcoves, hundreds of them. Each shelf held a corpse, wrapped tightly, mouths stitched shut with copper wire. Some were missing limbs. One turned its head as they passed, just slightly, but enough for Jakob to raise his blade. "Keep walking," Theodore whispered. "They are watchers, meant to bear witness, not intervene." But even he wasn't certain. They reached the main chamber after an hour. The doors were sealed, a great bronze slab engraved with a sun devouring a vulture, flanked by piles of bones half fused into the floor. Dried blood stained the threshold in ancient handprints. Theodore pressed the shard against the seal. It pulsed once. Then a hiss. The slab groaned open. The chamber within was vast, shaped like an inverted pyramid. The walls were tiered with niches holding relics, chalices, bones, armor, books bound in flesh. In the center sat a sarcophagus of black marble, untouched by time, veined with glowing green. But above it floated something unnatural, a swirling mass of dust and light, whispering. It hovered silently, a mist shaped like a man, its body a storm of particles held together by cursed will. Theodore stepped forward. "That, not a ghost?" "No," Seraphina breathed. "That's a memory." As if in response, the thing moved. The chamber exploded in a shriek, 1,000 voices screaming in reverse, echoing from stone and bone. The mist darted forward and struck one of the mercenaries, a Kislevite named Boros. It pierced his skull like a blade. Boros stiffened. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes rolled into his head. Then, with a horrible snap, his limbs twisted inward, bones folding like paper. His chest collapsed inward with a sound like wet branches breaking. He dropped, dead. Or worse. The remaining mercenary panicked and fired his crossbow. The bolt sailed through the mist. The storm twisted, expanded, and roared. Jakob threw a flask of oil and flame, igniting the center of the chamber. The ghost screamed again, a sound not meant for the living, and recoiled into the ceiling, dissipating in fragments of light. For a moment, only the sound of the fire crackling echoed through the tomb. Then the sarcophagus began to open. Stone scraped on stone. Theodore stepped back, heart pounding. This wasn't in the texts. Nothing mentioned the tomb being occupied. Seraphina raised her pistol. "Be ready." A hand emerged first, skeletal, adorned with rings and gold thread, but no rot. It gripped the edge of the coffin with unnatural strength. Then the hit. Not a skull, but a face. Dry and preserved, lips blackened, eyes shut, its brow crowned with a circlet of obsidian. The creature inhaled. It breathed. With a hiss, its eyes snapped open, glowing green. It looked at Theodore and smiled. Then it spoke in a voice like cracking tombstones. "You are late, heir of dust." Chapter 6. The Guardian and the Gate. The smile should not have been possible. The thing, this mummified monarch, this creature that had not drawn breath in millennia, curled its withered lips back over blackened teeth, its grin stretching far too wide, distorting the dried sinews of its cheeks. The glow in its eyes brightened, a terrible phosphorescence that flickered like torches inside its skull. Theodore stumbled backward, boots scraping against ancient stone. Jakob raised his blade, breathing hard through clenched teeth, and Seraphina leveled her pistol with deadly calm. "I am Agentumri," the creature rasped. "Last son of Setep, high priest of the Scorpion moon, crown prince of Libaris, and still deathless." "Stay back," Seraphina warned. Agentumri ignored her. He stepped from the sarcophagus with agonizing grace, the creak of his joints echoing through the tomb like the snapping of dry branches. Dust poured off his robes, each movement trailing centuries behind it. The air grew colder, and the flickering torchlight dimmed. "You have brought the shard," he said, eyes locked onto Theodore. "You are touched, not by fate, but by them." Theodore clutched the shard tight to his chest, unable to speak. He could feel it pulsing again, hot, hungry, as if it recognized its master. "They will come," Agentumri continued. "You carry a piece of prophecy that should never have seen sun again. You wake what should remain buried." With a sudden burst of speed that defied his withered frame, the undead prince lunged. In one skeletal hand he snatched the mercenary nearest the exit, a young Arabian named Malik. There was no warning, no build-up, only a crack, like a dry root splitting. Malik's head twisted around with a wet snap, the spinal column bursting from his neck like a cork. His eyes rolled, still wide in shock as his body collapsed to the floor, twitching. The creature held the dripping spine in its claws, staring at the others. "I am still Prince," he growled. "You do not raise your voices in my hall." Jakob roared and charged, blade aimed for Hentimria's throat. But the prince moved like a serpent. In one fluid motion he dodged the blow and drove his taloned hand straight through Jakob's abdomen. The impact was like a thunderclap, flesh tearing, bone crunching. Jakob's mouth opened in a silent scream. The creature leaned close, whispering something in Nehekhara, a word that sizzled in the air. Then he withdrew his hand, and Jakob fell to his knees, blood spilling in thick, steaming gouts. His face twisted in agony, then slackened as he pitched forward into darkness. Theodore screamed. Serafina fired twice, then 3 times. The bullet struck Hentimri's chest, but passed through with little effect. Dust and embalming fluid spurted, but he did not fall. Instead he staggered back, the ancient magics within his corpse flaring violently. The final shot caught his jaw, blowing it half off and sending shards of yellowed bone clattering across the floor. He hissed, a sound that sounded like boiling oil, and vanished in a whirl of dark wind, sucked into a narrow crevice in the wall with unnatural speed. Silence. Only 3 remained now. Serafina wiped her mouth, her hand trembling. "Jakob's dead," Theodore said numbly, staring at the pool of blood spreading toward his boots. "He saved me." Serafina nodded grimly. "Then we make it count." At the back of the chamber, a set of bronze doors had cracked open, just slightly. The blast from the earlier ghost, or perhaps the prince's awakening, had disturbed whatever ancient mechanisms held it shut. Theodore stepped closer. Carved into the doors was a scene, dozens of skeletal figures bowing before a colossal figure with a crown of stars. At the base, 7 stars circled a serpent, devouring its tail. "The next gate," the Ador whispered. Together, they prized the doors open. Being beyond was a corridor of red stone, its walls pulsing faintly as if alive. The floors were slick with something black and sticky, and the air stank of vinegar and decay. Every few meters stood a statue, jackal-headed warriors, each holding a massive curved blade across its chest. "Guardians," Seraphia said. "I've seen this before." They moved slowly, torches raised. The statues loomed in silence, their obsidian eyes watching. Halfway through, a grinding sound echoed from behind them. One of the statues had moved. It stepped from its pedestal, slow but deliberate, a groan of stone on stone. Then another moved, and another. Suddenly the corridor was filled with noise, grinding, groaning, scraping. The guardians were waking. "Run," Theodore whispered. "Run!" They sprinted. Behind them blades hissed through the air, carving ancient stone like butter. One guardian cleaved the air above Theodore's head, severing the torch from his hand. Darkness surged in behind them like a tidal wave. They reached the end, another sealed door, but this one bore no inscription. Serafina pulled a relic from her coat, a glass orb filled with black liquid, and hurled it at the seal. It burst in a flash of violet fire, melting the stone just enough for Theodore to shove the shard into the gap. The door opened. They spilled into the next chamber as the guardians halted at the threshold, bound by ancient laws not even death could violate. Theodore gasped, his lungs on fire. He looked around. They stood at the entrance to a vast chasm, a stairway descending into blackness. Below, the glint of gold shimmered, coffins, treasure, and something massive shifting in the dark. The shard pulsed again, and far below, something answered. Chapter 7. Into the Necropolis. The stairway dropped into the abyss like a spine descending into the earth's heart. Each step was carved from obsidian and red sandstone, slick with dust and old blood. Echoes reverberated up the shaft, not merely from their movements, but from something breathing deep below. Theodore led, torch flickering in his hand, the shard clenched in the other. Its glow had stabilized now, no longer pulsing violently, but radiating a soft green light that cast their shadows grotesquely along the walls. Behind him, Seraphina descended with cautious grace, her pistols drawn, her eyes scanning every corner. Her silence was a weapon now, sharp, deliberate. She had spoken no words since Jakob's death. Theodore didn't press her. As they reached the bottom, the chasm opened into a vast necropolis. It stretched beneath the earth like a buried city, avenues lined with catacombs, statues taller than watchtowers, and temples shaped like pyramids inverted, hanging from the ceiling like the fangs of some sleeping god. Coffins stood vertically along the walls like sentinels, each sealed with wax and wrapped in chains. And in the center, a colossal mausoleum shaped like a lotus flower, petals of gold and lapis curling open toward the black sky above. The city of sleep, the Aturan whispered, voice barely audible. It's real. As the air was suffocating, dry yet thick, clinging to their skin with the stink of ancient resin and bitter myrrh. It settled in the lungs like ash, refusing to be expelled. They moved through the streets, their torchlight revealing scenes carved in bas-relief. Skeletal chariots racing through fields of fire, priests pouring blood over pyramids, and twin figures locked in eternal combat, both wearing the crown of stars. The twins, Theodore murmured, running his fingers over the stone. The prophecy, 2 heirs, 1 empire, 1 betrayal. A low rumble rolled through the tomb, like a beast turning in its sleep. Seraphina tensed. We're not alone. They pressed on, reaching the steps of the Lotus Mausoleum. The doors were vast, carved from blackened ivory, covered in prayer hexes and adorned with eye sigils. As Theodore stepped forward, the shard in his hand flashed. The doors unsealed with a groan of immense stone, opening inward to reveal a chamber that defied natural architecture. It was spherical. The walls curved upward and downward simultaneously, covered in mirrors that didn't reflect their faces. Instead, they showed corpses, rows of them, lying on stone slabs. Some had skin, some were flayed. Some screamed silently from behind glass that didn't exist. A dais rose in the center, upon which stood a stone altar shaped like a skull. Upon it rested a second shard, identical to Dieter's, but cracked down the center. Theodore reached toward it, and the floor split open. From the pit below, something emerged. It did not walk. It slithered. The construct was massive, serpentine, its body a coiled length of rusted bronze and bones fused by magic. Its head was a cobra's, with 8 green eyes blinking in sync, each gaze venomous. Its fangs were iron sabers, dripping a black fluid that sizzled where it touched stone. With the guardian of Atparat, Theodore gasped. The creature struck. It surged forward like a launched ballista, jaws snapping open. Seraphina fired, both pistols roaring, striking the creature's skull. Sparks flew, one eye shattered with a hiss, but it barely faltered. It swept its tail, smashing into Seraphina and sending her flying across the chamber into a pillar. The crunch was sickening, stone and possibly bone. Theodore screamed, drew his dagger, and ducked as the cobra thing coiled and lunged again. Its fangs snapped, inches from his chest. He stabbed at the eye sockets, the blade bouncing off enchanted bone. With a roar, the construct twisted its body and wrapped around him, crushing his ribs. His vision blurred as pressure mounted. Blood filled his mouth. His arms were pinned. Then his hand brushed the second shard on the altar. A blast of energy erupted outward in a wave of green flame. The construct screamed, not mechanically, but in a sound laced with agony and betrayal. It writhed, pulling away, body splitting down the center. Flames engulfed it from the inside, unraveling its magic, bones turning to black ash mid-air. It collapsed in a heap, its skull split and hissing. Silence returned. Theodore fell to his knees, coughing blood, ribs throbbing. He crawled to Seraphina's side. She groaned, blood leaking from her mouth, but she was alive. He looked at the two shards, one whole, one cracked. They pulsed together. And then, from within the altar, a sound, stone grinding. A compartment opened, revealing a scroll wrapped in gold wire. Theodore reached for it, trembling. On its cover, the same glyph that had haunted him since Nuln, the mark of the bloodless heir, the prophecy complete. He stared at the scroll, eyes wide, breath shallow, and deep within the necropolis, something laughed. Chapter 8. The Curse Awakens. Theodore stared at the scroll, the gold wire cutting shallow lines into his shaking fingers. It was warm, not the warmth of parchment left too close to fire, but something deeper, alive. The symbols on the cover writhed faintly, shifting like maggots beneath skin. He could not look away. Seraphina stirred beside him, groaning, one hand pressed to her ribs. "Don't," she whispered through blood and grit. "Not yet." But it was too late. Theodore unwound the wire, the metal snapping apart with a hiss like escaping steam. As the scroll unrolled, the air changed. A low hum began, deep, ancient, primal. It rose from the stone beneath them, echoed through the mausoleum, and pulsed outward like a heartbeat. Light seeped from the scroll's ink, glowing like veins under flesh. The glyphs rearranged themselves, forming a shape that should not exist, an eye ringed in 7 stars. And then the tomb breathed. Stone groaned above them. Dust poured from cracks in the ceiling. The mirrors that lined the walls shattered simultaneously, raining glass like daggers. The torches flickered, then turned blue. All around them, the dead woke. The coffins along the walls opened with a sound like ancient applause, wood splitting, chains snapping, nails pried loose by invisible hands. Skeletal fingers clawed their way into the world, dragging shriveled corpses upright. Some wore masks of gold, others were bare, their eye sockets hollow, yet watching. Dozens of them, in hundreds, they lined the streets of the buried city, their heads turning in perfect unison toward the Lotus Mausoleum. And they knelt. A slow, synchronized movement, thousands of bones creaking, cracking. Some bowed so low their foreheads struck stone and shattered. None moved again. They simply waited. Theodore staggered back, the scroll falling from his hands. "What the hell is this?" Seraphina gasped, forcing herself upright. "The prophecy," Theodore said, breathless. "It was never meant to warn, it was a summons." The walls of the chamber pulsed again, then burst outward in a blast of air and dust. The floor beneath them cracked. With a deafening rumble, the mausoleum split in half. Chunks of gold and lapis crashed to the earth, and through the devastation, something rose. At first it was shadow, then shape. A figure emerged from the rift. Tall, gaunt, cloaked in a funeral shroud of black and crimson silk. Gold chains hung from its limbs, and a crown of bone hovered above its head, spinning slowly. Its face was a mask, blank, expressionless, save for the twin orbs of green flame burning in its sockets. It was not alive, but it was not dead, and it knew them. It extended one long-fingered hand towards Theodore. "You were chosen," it said. The voice came from all directions at once, through air, through stone, through blood. The bloodless heir, the harbinger. "No," Theodore breathed. "You've made a mistake." "You carry the mark," it intoned. The scroll unlocked it. The shard called you. The air grew heavier. Seraphina aimed her pistol, but her hand trembled. "What do you want from me?" Theodore asked. "To awaken what was sealed, to bring judgment to those who forgot." From the necropolis, thousands of corpses rose. Not in chaos, but in formation. Ranks of skeletal soldiers stepped into lines, chariots reassembled themselves. War statues stirred, catapults uncurled from vines and dust, reloading with flaming skulls. The army of the dead waited. "Lead them," the figure said, "or be buried with them." Then it turned. It knelt to Theodore, and the army followed. A shockwave burst from the mausoleum, shaking the underground city. Above them, deep within the desert sands, cracks spread through the surface. Monuments split, statues wept blood, the land itself groaned. The curse had been sleeping. Now it was awake. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Empire of Dust. The desert above cracked with the sound of breaking bones. Pillars once buried beneath the dunes erupted skyward, displacing tons of sand in choking geysers. Jackal-headed statues surfaced like drowned gods, their mouths agape in silent fury. Obelisks fractured, revealing glowing veins of warpstone, and the sky itself dimmed, as if the sun, horrified by what stirred below, tried to turn its gaze away. Theodore stumbled into the dying light. He and Seraphina emerged from the necropolis like reborn wraiths, caked in sweat and blood and ash. Behind them, the mausoleum's petals folded inward once more, sealing the city of the dead beneath layers of ancient enchantment and shifting stone. And something followed. It did not rise. It unfolded. The sands parted as a figure broke through, a lesser leech priest, still bearing the regalia of forgotten priesthood, golden wrappings inscribed with curses, a neck collar of scarabs fused to his rotted flesh, and eyes like pale moons. He did not walk, he drifted, suspended above the ground by his own necromantic will. Seraphina raised her pistol. "I'm done with speeches." The leech priest raised a skeletal hand, and her weapon froze mid-shot, locked in place, her fingers seizing up. Blood burst from her nostrils as if her veins had been pinched shut. "Stop!" Theodore cried. The creature turned. Its voice was dust over stone. "You summoned the scroll. The chain is forged. You are heir to dust." Theodore stepped forward, swallowing bile. "I didn't choose this." Undo. The sand remembers. The stars obey. The priest reached inside its own ribcage and withdrew a scroll, smaller but ancient, wrapped in strips of mummified flesh. "Read," it hissed, "and see." Theodore hesitated. Then, slowly, he took the scroll and unwrapped it. The glyphs blazed into life. The world fell away. He stood on a battlefield. But it was not the desert he knew. This was before. A Nehekhara unspoiled by time, its cities crowned in gold, its skies painted with meteoric fire. Banners flapped in a wind that smelled of blood and incense. Two armies clashed beneath a burning eclipse. On one side, a warrior king in bronze, his body aglow with the magic of the gods. His face was Theodore's own. Opposite him, a dark twin, bearing a crown of silver and wielding a staff tipped with a human skull. His voice called storms. Between them, the land bled. 1,000 chariots crashed into lines of foot soldiers. Skeletal warriors tore into flesh and metal. Vultures the size of horses raked through the air. Spellfire burst from temples, incinerating lines of men and undead alike. The battle was endless. The betrayal was absolute. He saw himself, The past self fall to one knee, wounded by his twin. The crown torn from his brow. The gods silent. But before death, he whispered something. A curse. The vision ended with a scream. Theodore dropped the scroll, eyes wide, lungs heaving. Blood trickled from one ear. The leash priest hovered closer. You are him. The crown traitor. The exiled prince. No, Theodore muttered. That wasn't me. That was a memory. A shadow. Reincarnate, the leech said, voice solemn. The cycle continues, and now the time has returned. Seraphina stirred behind him, her voice rasping through broken ribs. We need to leave. Theodore shook his head. We can't. If I'm the heir, then someone else is the twin. Correct, the priest hissed. And he stirs. From the horizon, dust rose, not from wind, but movement. Figures. Another army, far larger, dead flesh bound in gold. Black banners stitched with crimson suns. A colossal figure at the front, cloaked in a shroud of dusk, eyes glowing violet. The other heir had risen, and he was coming. Chapter 10. The Leeches Bargain. The desert trembled. Far across the sands, under the bruised sky, the rival army gathered, like an infestation surfacing from beneath the skin of the world. Teoa could see the silhouettes now, twisted war beasts stitched from multiple corpses, siege engines pulled by chained ghouls, chariots pulled by skeletal steeds with flayed muscle twitching beneath arcane brands. And at the center of it all, him, the twin, the one from the vision. His figure was impossible to miss, not due to size but presence. He rode atop a platform borne by 4 towering Ushabti, statues animated by pure hatred and magic, his form wrapped in swirling shadow. He wore no crown, only a hood of shadowed silk, his face hidden behind a mask of obsidian, carved in Theodore's own likeness, except the eyes glowed violet, cold as starless voids. The twin raised one hand. The wind changed direction. A gust rolled toward them, carrying not sand, but voices. Thousands. Whispering, moaning, pleading, then screaming. Seraphina stumbled as she tried to rise, still holding her cracked ribs. We need to run. That is not a fight we survive. The Ligi priest hovered before them, silent, watching the approach of the rival army with no fear, only acceptance. You will die if you flee, the leech said, tone matter-of-fact. Your enemies do not forget. Their hunger is not for conquest, it is for you. Theodore clenched his fists. Then what do you want from me, to fight with your corpses, to lead your damned army into battle? Not yet, the leech whispered, eyes glowing dimly. There is still a right, a bargain to seal. The ground beneath them cracked. A narrow stairwell emerged, spiraling downward into darkness. The air that billowed out smelled like rotting incense and old fire. You must enter the Chamber of Oaths, the leech said, and bind yourself to the dynasty. Seraphina stepped between them, raising her pistol again despite the trembling in her arms. No more tricks. What's down there? The leash tilted its head. The truth. Theodore didn't wait. He limped toward the stairs, still cradling the twin shards and the prophecy scroll. The chamber below was a hexagonal vault, lit by 6 braziers, each fed not by wood but by the burning bones of long-dead kings. The flames whispered. At the center stood a dais, and atop it, an ancient throne, crafted of obsidian, bone, and gold. The skulls of animals and men adorned its sides. The seat itself was soaked with something long dried, brown-black blood so old it flaked like ash. As Theodore approached, the flames rose higher. He heard the voice again. "You are the bloodless heir, born without legacy, crowned by fate, denied by the gods, yet chosen by the dead." Images flooded his mind. The twin again, but clearer now. Not just an echo, a sorcerer prince, born from the same line as Theodore, resurrected through ancient rituals, betrayed by his brother, seeking revenge through millennia. The crown didn't belong to either of them. It belonged to whoever seized it with blood and binding. The leash appeared beside him. "You must choose." "What choice?" Theodore spat. "You've already decided." The priest held out a blade. It wasn't ceremonial. It was personal. Small, curved like a fang, engraved with a single word. Kepesh. "You must offer blood willingly," it said, "not spilled in battle, but given in purpose. That is how the dynasties bind. One drop for every king buried beneath this sand." Theodore looked down at his palm. Then he took the blade. The first cut was deep. He gritted his teeth as he dragged it across his forearm, the steel slicing muscle, exposing veins. Blood poured freely onto the dais. It sizzled. The braziers roared. The throne shimmered and then vanished, replaced by a crown of stars floating in mid-air, each point a flicker of dying starlight. Chains of gold and bone wrapped around it, keeping it from fleeing. But it moved toward him, pulled by the blood. Theodore reached out and screamed. Agony ripped through him like molten glass. His spine arched, his eyes rolled white. The shards burned through his skin, fusing into his bones. The scroll erupted into flame. Glyphs poured from his mouth unbidden, ancient tongues not spoken in millennia. And the crown answered him, not onto his head, into him. His skin cracked, his veins turned black. For one terrible second he felt the weight of every king who had ever ruled these sands, every death, every betrayal, every horror. Then silence. When he opened his eyes, the Lich was kneeling. Seraphina stared, wide-eyed, half terrified, half in awe. Behind them, the sand began to quake again, and the army of the dead stood up, not just the ones from the Necropolis, but new ones, fresh ones, old ones. Legion after legion, their armor gleaming despite the rot, banners raised high. The Leech's voice echoed once more. "The dynasty obeys. What is your first command, my king?" Chapter 11. The Map of Bones. Night fell hard upon Nehekhara, a blanket of unnatural blackness that smothered the stars. No torch, no fire, no spell could pierce its depths for long. The desert held its breath, as if the dunes themselves feared what now walked upon them. At the summit of a crumbled ziggurat overlooking the shifting sands, Theodore stood, no longer just a scholar, but something more, something ancient. The blood offering still stained his arm, now wrapped in coarse linen, the pain dulled but constant. Beneath the bandage, the veins had turned an obsidian hue, and when he moved his hand, shadows twisted unnaturally at his fingertips. He didn't understand it. He didn't need to. The army below waited in perfect silence, an ocean of the dead stretching to the horizon. Every soldier, every chariot, every risen priest, all stared upward, lifeless yet alert. They felt his presence now. They obeyed, not because they wished to, because they were bound. And deep inside him, a voice whispered still. Seraphina sat near a dying campfire, ribs wrapped tight, face gaunt with exhaustion. Her pistol lay beside her, but her hand rarely left it. "You haven't said a word in hours," she muttered, her voice hoarse. Theodore's eyes remained fixed on the sands. "I'm not sure I'm the one speaking anymore," he replied. Before she could answer, a tremor rolled beneath their feet, a deep, resonant quake. At first it was subtle, then violent. Bones rattled, sand hissed down the slopes of the ziggurat. The undead army stood unshaken, but Theodore and Seraphia stumbled. A jagged line of fire split the sky. From the sands below something rose, not a creature, not a building, but an artifact. A tower of bone. It twisted upward like a spiraling spine, vertebrae the size of coffins, sinew and ligaments of gold keeping it from crumbling. At its peak something glowed, a map, etched into a floating tablet of stone and flesh. The map of bones? Theodore descended the steps of the ziggurat slowly, flanked by 6 deathless guards adorned with vulture helms and shields engraved with serpents. At the base of the tower the map shimmered and turned to face him. It was alive. Its surface undulated like water, symbols shifting and reshaping, cities lost to time, rivers that no longer flowed, names scratched out and rewritten in red ink that bled into the stone. And at its heart, glowing with cold flame, Lybaris, the city of the twin kings, the origin of the curse, the tomb of the first betrayal. As Theodore reached out, the map surged forward, slamming against his palm, fusing to his skin. He screamed as visions flooded his mind, temples of obsidian, wars beneath burning suns, priests tearing out hearts with golden sickles, and finally the twin, the other heir, a sorcerer prince born from hate, reforged in pain. He bore Theodore's face, but it was twisted by war and death. His army was older, stronger, and it was already moving toward Lybaris. Leonor gasped, falling to his knees. Why there? The Leeches priest materialized behind him. It is where the covenant was broken. It is where it must be restored or ended. Seraphina approached, silent, watching the map burn into Theodore's flesh. She crouched beside him, one hand on his shoulder. Then we go to Lybaris, she said. We face your brother, and we end this. Theodore looked up, sweat streaming down his face, pain etched into every line. No, he whispered. We don't end it. He rose slowly, eyes glowing faint green in the darkness. We begin it. Above them, the stars aligned, 7 in perfect order forming the eye of the serpent. The time had come. The war for the dynasty had begun. Chapter 12. Caravan of the Damned. The army moved at dusk. Not because of strategy, no living scouts, no worry for heat or concealment. They moved then because that was the hour the veil thinned, when the stars began to burn with green fire and the wind hissed across the dunes with the voices of the long dead. The undead did not sleep. The dead did not tire. But Theodore and Seraphina did. And their human frailty was the only anchor between the march of bone and the realm of flesh. The desert stretched endless before them, painted black and silver beneath a sickle moon. The sands shifted unnaturally, often parting before the army as if in deference or dread. Towering Ushabti walked with the weight of ancient gods, their heavy footfalls cracking stone buried beneath millennia. At the head of the host, Theodore rode not on horseback, but upon a throne-borne palanquin carried by 6 skeletal giants, each etched with hieroglyphs that flared at his passing. He hated it. He hated the way the dead bowed, hated the way they waited for his orders with unthinking loyalty. He hated how natural it felt to give those orders. Seraphina rode beside him, atop a skeletal war beast, once a lion, now a construct of ivory and sinew. Her eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. She hadn't smiled in days. The first attack came just after midnight. A sound like thunder, real thunder, split the air. From the dunes ahead, a gout of green lightning arced down, incinerating 3 bone chariots in a blast of concussive force. Limbs scattered, wheels split, and charred bones rained like hail. Then they came. Ghouls. Not the mindless scavengers Theodore had read about. These were lean, fast, starved things, draped in desert rags and armor stolen from ancient battlefields. Their eyes glowed violet, like their master. Their claws were bone daggers. Their mouths were rows of cracked obsidian. They struck with shrieking fury. The front lines fell into chaos. Spears shattered. Shields cracked. Skeletal warriors were torn apart like dolls. Ribs cracked open as ghouls dug for marrow. Theodore stood, clutching the armrests of his palanquin. "Form the Crescent!" he shouted. Instantly, the dead obeyed. The front lines pulled inward, forming a bowl of blades, trapping the ghouls in a death chamber. Catapults launched flaming skulls. Screaming faces streaked through the night sky before detonating in showers of green flame. Ghouls burst into fire, shrieking, flailing. The sand turned to glass beneath the inferno. But then a greater horror came. A chariot, larger than anything Theodore had seen, rolled over the horizon, drawn by two mummified sphinxes with spiked crowns and serpentine tails. Upon it stood the enemy heir, his twin, his face still hidden behind that flawless obsidian mask. He raised one hand. The ground split. From beneath, a maw opened, a pit filled with gnashing teeth and writhing tendrils, swallowing 20 soldiers in one gulp. Their bones were not crushed. They were consumed, digested by something older than undeath. "Fall back," Seraphina shouted. But the order was irrelevant. Theodore leapt from his throne, landing in the sand with a grunt, and extended his arm. The veins in his forearm burst open, black blood sprayed across the sand. The glyphs responded. A wall of bones erupted between the two forces, an impenetrable mass of skulls and spears, still screaming from the lives they once had. The ground trembled with the magic it took. The air sizzled. His twin watched. Then he spoke, not aloud, but into Theodore's mind. "You delay the inevitable. You forget the truth. You always do." The vision flashed of betrayal, of two boys once destined to rule together, of one crowned and one burned. The contact broke. The enemy retreated, not in defeat but satisfaction. The ghouls dispersed like mist. The sand stilled. Silence fell once more. Theodore collapsed. Blood pooled around him. The crown within him dimmed slightly. His body screamed with agony. Seraphina rushed to his side, lifting his head, wiping the grit from his face. "You're bleeding through your soul," she whispered. "You'll burn yourself out." He shook his head, barely conscious. "I saw him. I saw what he remembers." The wind howled again, and the stars above shimmered in unnatural hues. They had only 3 nights left before the alignment of the 7 stars. 3 nights before destiny chose its king. Chapter 13. Oasis of Mirages. They found the oasis just before dawn, nestled between jagged dunes like an emerald wound in the flesh of the desert. It shimmered in the distance, distorted by heat and magic, its surface still and glassy as a serpent's eye. Palms rose around it like skeletal fingers, their fronds blackened by sun and dust. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was too quiet. Theodore dismounted his thrown palanquin with a grunt, the cracked bones of his legs groaning beneath him. Every step now was pain, a slow, creeping rot that pulsed with the power of the crown buried in his chest. The shard had melted into his skin fully, leaving behind a network of green veins that pulsed in rhythm with the cursed dynasty's heart. Seraphina flanked him, crossbow slung over her shoulder, a fresh scar bisecting her brow. She eyed the oasis warily. "There's no breeze, no animals. This place is wrong." "It's not just water," Theodore murmured. "It's a relic." They approached with weapons drawn, flanked by silent honor guards. undead captains who had once commanded empires and now moved only at Theodore's thought. As they stepped beneath the dead palms, the air changed, thickened, warped. Then the visions began. The first came as they knelt to drink. Serafina dipped her fingers into the pool and saw herself standing over Theodore's corpse, eyes cold, pistol still smoking. She blinked. The image was gone. Theodore reached out, and the water boiled where he touched it. Steam rose, revealing faces beneath the surface. Dozens, hundreds, all of them his own, all screaming. Some were crowns, some were shackles. One wore both. The waters whispered. One must fall, for the other to rise. The air trembled. The oasis moaned. Around them, the sand cracked open as ancient pylons burst from the ground, monoliths carved with runes of betrayal, death, and resurrection. At their bases, mummified figures clawed free from the earth, but they did not attack. They wept. Mirages, Theodore said. Echoes. This place remembers. He turned to one of the weeping dead. Its jaw was shattered, its eyes hollow. It clutched a bundle wrapped in ancient silk. With slow, jerking hands, it extended the bundle to him. Theodore took it. Inside, a broken medallion bearing the twin serpent sigil of Libaris, the royal seal of the twin dynasty. It split down the middle, one side bearing his likeness, the other twisted, corrupted, but undeniably him. Serafina touched the fragment. Instantly her eyes rolled white. She collapsed. Serafina stood in a golden palace, surrounded by priests chanting in dead tongues. The twin princes stood at opposite ends of a throne room, one cloaked in white, the other in black. Between them, a woman, their mother. The twin in white extended his hand. The twin in black drove a dagger into her spine. Blood soaked the floor. The white twin screamed and became Theodore. The black twin laughed and became him. The palace crumbled. The vision ended. Serafina jolted awake with a strangled cry, hand on her blade. "Gods," she whispered. "You were brothers. You loved each other." "And I killed him," Theodore said, voice hollow. The water boiled again. From its depths rose a figure, liquid, reflective, perfect. A twin. He stood atop the surface, robes flowing unnaturally, mask flawless. He did not speak. He looked. Theodore stepped forward. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he asked. "That day, that death." The reflection nodded once. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." The reflection tilted its head and whispered, "You still don't." The oasis erupted. Water shot into the sky like blood from a slit throat. The monoliths cracked. The weeping corpses shrieked and turned to ash. The reflection exploded in green flame. The ground shook. The oasis was collapsing. Theodore grabbed Serafina, dragging her backward as the earth swallowed the water, the sand drinking the blood of memory. A final wail echoed across the sky, not from a mouth, but from the very bones of the desert. When it ended, only silence remained. The oasis was gone. Only dust and bone were left behind. Theodore looked at the medallion fragment in his hand. The last words of the vision rang in his ears. Only betrayal can break the curse. Only blood can seal it again. Chapter 14. The city beneath the sand. The wind screamed across the dunes, peeling flesh from bone. By midday, the sun had vanished behind a veil of dust, and the sky above Nehekhara was no longer blue, but stained a permanent, storm-touched ochre. The dead moved tirelessly beneath it, cutting a silent swath toward their final destination, Libaris, the lost jewel of the south, now reduced to a graveyard and tomb beneath endless sand. Only Theodore and Seraphina felt the burden of the heat, their skins scorched and cracked despite layers of cloth and linen. Yet something in Theodore had changed. His blood ran cooler now. The rot that threaded through his veins numbed him to pain. The whispers had grown louder, ever present, murmuring advice, warnings, names of people long dead and places never charted. And one name echoed above them all. Nehekhara, the royal observatory of Libaris. It had once sat atop a hill of black glass, mapping the heavens with instruments powered by starfire and magic stolen from the moon. Now it was buried beneath dunes, guarded by wards older than the tombs of kings, its doors sealed with incantations only the blood of heirs could undo. They arrived in the shadow of dusk, a darkness deeper than night. The sand around the hill shivered. Theodore approached, flanked by 6 skeletal guards wrapped in azure and gold. Before him the dune pulsed as if breathing. He held up the medallion fragment, the shard fused into his palm, glowing like a coal under his flesh. The sand parted. Ropes of bone writhed from the earth, dragging the sand away like curtains, revealing a stage. And there it was, the observatory. It stood crooked, half submerged, its domed roof fractured. Black glass shattered like a giant's eye. Pillars bore the wear of 10,000 years. Statues lay broken, some hacked to pieces in anger, others simply crushed under the weight of time. Seraphina muttered, "It stinks of sorcery." They entered through the ruined archway. Inside, silence ruled. Dust motes danced like spirits in stagnant air. Racks of ancient scrolls lined the walls fused with cobwebs. Celestial charts and astrolabes lay scattered, their metal frames twisted into symbols not even Theodore could decipher. And at the center of the chamber, suspended above a pit of mirrors, was the mechanism. A massive orrery of bone and brass, suspended by chains, still spinning slowly as if moved by invisible hands. The planets were not spheres, but skulls, each engraved with runes of death and divinity. The central sun pulsed with a sickly green glow. "This is where they tracked the alignment," Theodore said, "where they planned the crowning of the bloodless heir." Seraphina circled the pit cautiously. Planned? Or summoned? Theodore stepped closer to the orrery, breath catching in his throat. Beneath it, etched into the mirror pit, was the prophecy written in blood that had never dried. He read it aloud, each word scraping across his teeth like sandpaper. "When the serpent devours the moon and the 7 bleed the sky, one shall rise with no pulse, crowned by sin and silence. One shall fall pierced by the twin stars lie. The throne shall take only the worthy. The dead shall walk, but not all shall reign." He looked to Seraphina. "Have to complete it." She shook her head. "We don't even understand it." But he was already moving. He climbed the steps to the top of the orrery platform. The skulls spun faster now, drawn to his presence. The air grew heavier, thick with ozone and rot. Dust lifted from the floor, coalescing into forms, spirits trapped in the observatory for eons. They screamed silently. Theodore reached the altar, and a voice split the air. "You should not be here." It came from behind them. A figure stood at the broken archway, draped in violet-black robes that bled mist. It was faceless, no mask, no skin, only smoke and burning eyes. Seraphina raised her weapon, but it exploded in her hand, shrapnel carved into her face. She screamed, fell. The figure floated inward. "You claim what is not yours," it said. "You wear a crown made from betrayal. You wake what should sleep." Theodore turned to face it. "You're his envoy. The figure nodded once. I am memory. I am vengeance. I am the part of you that never forgave. It raised a skeletal hand. Chains burst from the mirrors, wrapping around Theodore's legs, arms, throat. They burned cold. The orrery screamed as it spun wildly, orbiting madness. "Let me go," he roared. But the figure only whispered, "Submit, or be erased." The chains dug into his skin. Blood spattered the mirrors. The skull sun above him cracked, releasing a storm of green fire that bathed the room. The spirits screamed. Seraphina crawled toward Theodore. Her face burned, eyes bloodied, but she reached him. With one trembling hand she placed her palm to his chest and pushed. The shard in Theodore's flesh responded. It erupted, sending a pulse of light into the room. The chains disintegrated. The figure shrieked, its form unraveling into dust and flame. The spirits were consumed. The observatory fell silent once more. Theodore collapsed into Seraphina's arms. "I saw it," he rasped. "The alignment. It begins tomorrow." And the voice of the twin returned, echoing in his skull. "Then we crown the king or bury the world." Chapter 15. A Throne Reborn. Theodore awoke to darkness, but not the kind that came from the absence of light. It was the kind that whispered. It coiled around him, speaking in 1,000 voices, some crying, some chanting, others gasping through slit throats that hadn't breathed in centuries. The air reeked of embalming fluid, old blood, and the acrid sting of burned sigils. He was still in the observatory, but it had changed. The shattered dome above now glowed with a sickly emerald haze, and from it shone the impossible. 7 stars, aligned, radiant, bleeding light across the sky. The prophecy was no longer theory, it was now. The alignment had begun. The room was no longer an observatory. It had become a throne room of the dead. The orrery had unraveled, its skeletal planets now orbiting Theodore like vultures circling a corpse. Beneath him, the mirror pit reflected not his face, but 1,000 variations, some righted, some crowned, all hollow-eyed and waiting. Seraphina knelt beside him, wrapped in torn cloth, her face scorched and bleeding. Her eyes met his, bloodshot but unwavering. "It's time," she rasped. "They're waiting." Theodore turned. The entrance to the observatory now gaped open, and beyond it, the sands had been pushed aside. Libaris, ancient, blasphemous, alive, had risen from its tomb. Streets glimmered with spectral light, temples bled incense, and in the center, rising from a basin of bone and black water, stood the throne of dust. It was colossal. Forged from obsidian, rib cages, and golden masks, the bones of kings made up its arms, the spines of traitors adorned its back, and upon it, pulsing like a buried heart, hovered the crown, no longer metaphorical, but real. Each of the 7 star points spun slowly, leaking strands of shadow and light into the sky, and waiting at the base of the throne, surrounded by legions of his own undead, was him. The twin. He had shed the mask, and what lay beneath it was not human. His face was Theodore's, but warped by age and magic, skin pulled too tight, eyes sunken and violet, lips stitched at the edges to keep his smile from tearing wider. Around his brow floated the same scarred medallion fragment, bound to his flesh with living runes. He raised one hand, and his army moved. The battlefield was the city itself. The streets roared as undead clashed with undead, bone shattering against bone, chariots crashing through narrow alleyways, war beasts trampling towers. Ushabti battled temple guardians. carrion birds feasted on still-warm corpses. Seraphina led Theodore's front line, screaming orders, firing her last rounds and wielding a curved khopesh pried from a fallen priest. Theodore walked through it. Home. Each step echoed. Each breath filled with the scent of a past he hadn't lived, but remembered. When he reached the base of the throne, the twin waited. "You stole everything," the twin whispered. "You left me to burn." "We didn't know," Theodore replied. "We were boys. You were chosen. I was sacrificed." The crown above them pulsed, sensing the final act. The twin raised his hand, and from it emerged a blade made from shadow and memory. It screamed as it formed, a weapon born from pain. Theodore drew his dagger, still etched with his blood. The sky tore open. They caught. Blades clashed, with bursts of light. Each strike echoed across the desert, shaking towers and crumbling walls. Their wounds didn't bleed. They bled time. With each gash, Theodore saw visions of past betrayals, old deaths, his twin's slow spiral into madness, but he held firm. He struck low. The twin countered with a scream that split the air. Seraphina reached the stairs, but was forced back by an explosion of spectral fire. The throne began to sink. The battle broke into chaos. Theodore lunged, burying his blade in the twin's side. The world paused. For a moment he saw him, not the heir, not the sorcerer, but his brother, crying. The twin smiled. "Then finish it," he said. The crown dropped. Both reached for it. And it shows. The crown flared in a shockwave of searing emerald light, lifting Theodore off the ground. The twin screamed, not in pain, but in release. He crumbled into ash. The army fell still. Silence returned. Theodore landed on the throne. The crown hovered above his head. And then it descended. Bone fused with blood. History sealed its next chapter. The throne accepted its king. Chapter 16. Betrayal at Dusk. The crown sat upon Theodore's head like the weight of 1,000 tombs. It wasn't merely an object, it was a will, a consciousness, a kingdom compressed into a burning ring of bone, star metal, and bound souls. As it fused with his flesh, it whispered oaths sworn and broken, laws written in blood, names erased from stone. He felt every ruler who had worn it, every betrayal etched into its cold memory, each scream of power that echoed into eternity. His eyes burned green. His voice was no longer entirely his. And Labaris knelt. From the shattered gates to the cracked temples, the undead host bowed, one knee in the dust, skulls lowered, banners of skin fluttering in the hot breeze. The city trembled in reverence. Only Seraphia stood. She stared at Theodore from the foot of the throne, her face pale, jaw clenched, blood dried in streaks down her neck. In one hand she still held the khopesh, its edge notched from battle. Her other hand trembled at her side, empty, waiting. Theodore looked at her, but something in him had shifted. "You won," she said. Her voice echoed in the dead hush. "You've got your throne. You've got your army. And what now?" He opened his mouth to answer, but another voice spoke instead. "We'll bring the age of dust." From the shadows behind the throne, figures emerged. The high viziers of the dynasty, priests preserved by ritual and madness. Their faces were masks, their hands dripping with embalmer's pitch. Their eyes were sewn shut with golden wire. And behind them, the benefactor, a tall man in lacquered black armor, face hidden behind a jackal mask. The one who had financed the expedition from Nuln. The one who had never given a name. He stepped forward and bowed, not to Theodore, but to the viziers. "My task is complete," he said. "The heir is seated, the prophecy fulfilled. Now, bind him." Seraphina moved instinctively, raising her blade. "Bind? What the hell does that mean?" The jackal-masked man straightened. "The crown is not a symbol, it is a key. He is no king, he is the vessel." The viziers began to chant. The words cut like razors, old language, magic thick and black as tar. The air grew heavier, the sky darkened. From the crown, tendrils of smoke rose, coiling into the air, reaching for something unseen. Theodore clutched the armrests of the throne. "No, stop," he gasped. "I didn't agree to this." "You were never meant to agree," said the jackal-masked man. "You were meant to open the gate." Lightning tore the sky. The throne cracked. The city screamed. The ground split beneath the dais, revealing a pit filled with churning spirits, souls torn from history, screaming in endless torment. The viziers stepped closer, hands outstretched, trying to tear the crown from Theodore's head. Seraphina acted. She lunged, her khopesh slashing through the nearest priest's throat. Black ichor sprayed. Another turned, too slow, caught a blade to the spine. His body crumpled, twitching. Theodore screamed as the crown flared, magic tearing into him like hooked wire. He grabbed the arms of the throne and shoved. The dais exploded. Stone, sand, and sorcery blasted outward. The viziers were flung like rag dolls. The jackal-masked man crashed into a wall, his mask shattering, revealing a pale, inhuman face stretched thin by undeath. He hissed, fangs bared. Seraphina reached Theodore, pulling him free of the throne just as the crown exploded in a pillar of light. The undead around them convulsed. Some screamed and dropped, others turned to ash mid-salute. The city trembled. "Run!" Seraphina shouted, dragging Theodore from the collapsing dais. Behind them, the throne melted into the earth, swallowed by the pit it had concealed. Screams echoed upward, some in joy, others in hunger. They reached the gate. Theodore turned, one last glance at the city he had claimed and lost in the same breath. Then the gate collapsed. The city vanished behind them, buried again beneath the screaming sands. And above, 7 stars flared one final time, and blinked out, then another. The alignment had begun to pass, and with it, the betrayal was complete. Chapter 17. The Tomb War begins. The sands burned, not with heat, but with war. Across the plains that had once cradled empires, 2 armies collided with a fury that defied death itself. The sky was thick with ash and smoke, choked by the cries of carrion birds and the screeches of sorcerous constructs. Every gust of wind carried shards of bone, embers of cursed fire, and the stench of a battlefield long denied rest. The Tomb War had begun. At the northern edge of the ruined Libaran causeway, Theodore stood amid his vanguard, what remained of the loyal dead still bound to his fractured will. His body ached, every joint a battlefield, every breath a negotiation with the thing that still pulsed behind his eyes. The crown's remnants were fused to his skull, hair singed away, the golden rings embedded in his temples bleeding faint lines of dark ichor. Beside him, Seraphina reloaded her last pistol with shaking fingers. Her once pristine leathers were burned and caked with gore. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. Her left eye was swollen shut from a wound inflicted by shrapnel, her right burned with defiance. Across the cracked basin of Libaris, the enemy approached. An army of unnatural order. The twin had returned, not as a man, not even as a lich, but as something worse. His face was no longer his own. Flesh and mask had merged into a thing of shifting bone, his form cloaked in a swirling mantle of souls, each one wailing with its own hatred. His army dwarfed Theodore's. Monstrous constructs strode beside long-dead legions, titanic skeletal serpents slithered through the ranks, and airborne sphinxes carved spirals through the black clouds above. Their standards bore the sigil of the serpent reborn, 7 eyes upon a bleeding crown. They marched without pause, without breath, without mercy. The first clash was seismic. Peda's chariots met theirs on the ridge of the sunken plaza, wheels grinding over brittle skulls. Spears pierced rib cages, war cries became shrieks as bone was shattered. Bone spikes flung like javelins impaled riders mid-charge. One captain, still adorned in laurels from a war waged 4,000 years earlier, was cleaved in half by a construct shaped like a lion with blades for limbs. Its metal roared as it disemboweled 3 more with one sweeping arc. Theodore stepped forward, his hands raised. A pulse of green light exploded from his chest, reanimating those who had just fallen, not in confusion, but in rage. The dead stood again, limbs twitching, their empty sockets flaring, and charged anew. Seraphina led the second flank, carving a path through undead priests. Each kill was vicious, close, desperate. Her blades were chipped, her body slick with blood, some her own, most not. Behind her, reinforcements emerged from beneath the sand. Ancient catacomb dwellers long hidden, they joined without question, guided by memory alone. The tide turned. Then the twin descended. He didn't walk. He floated, carried by a wave of his own dead, a maelstrom of curses orbiting him like moons. When he spoke, it wasn't with words, it was with commands. One by one, Theodore's front lines buckled. The sky turned crimson, the clouds split, a rain of acid fell. Screams followed. Theodore met his gaze. A memory stabbed through him. 2 boys, a palace, a promise. We will rule together. Now only one would leave. With a roar, Theodore surged forward, his own power igniting. Bones beneath his feet twisted, forming steps to lift him. The fragments of the crown still embedded in his skull shimmered. He reached the twin. They collided in mid-air. The impact shattered the sky. Lightning danced through the clouds. Winds howled. Their magic met and tore through reality, splitting stone, cracking the heavens. The ground below buckled. Whole battalions were swallowed into newly formed craters. The twin laughed, a sound without joy. "You were always too weak," he spat. "You were always too blind," Theodore bellowed. Their spells clashed again. The twin unleashed a torrent of black flame. Theodore countered with a wave of green fire laced with his blood. The flames met, twisted, screamed. In the chaos, Seraphina led one final push toward the heart of the enemy line. Her sword shattered. She picked up another. When it broke, she used a shard. When the shard dulled, she used her fists. Her war cry echoed through the dead streets. The war raged until dusk, until blood soaked the sand so thickly it could no longer absorb. And then, silence. The armies recoiled. Each side counted its losses. Theodore fell to one knee, and the twin retreated into the night, not in defeat, but anticipation. The war was not over. It had only begun. Chapter 18. The Temple of Final Judgment. Night hung over the battlefield like a veil of mourning silk, smothering all color, all warmth. The wind had stopped. Not a grain of sand shifted. Even the whispers of the dead had gone still, as if the very souls of Nehekhara knew what loomed ahead. Theodore stood alone. His army lay in ruins behind him, piles of shattered bone, splintered shields, and weapons dulled by the blood of countless reanimated horrors. The dead that still stood did so on sheer will, their bodies half-decayed, their movements stiff and jerking, puppets with tangled strings. The air stank of scorched marrow and molten iron. Ahead, the Temple of Final Judgment rose like a dagger into the starlit sky. Carved into the face of a mountain blackened by time and blood, the temple's entrance was flanked by two statues, giant effigies of faceless judges, their arms crossed, their eyes blindfolded by chains of gold. Each bore a massive blade, gripped tip down, stabbing through the stone floor, where rivers of dried blood had carved canyons into the marble over centuries of ritual slaughter. Serafina limped beside Theodore, her left arm wrapped tightly to her chest, broken. Her face was a ruin, half burned, one eye milk-white from flame, lips cracked and bloodied. She looked at the temple and said only, "This is where it ends." Theodore said nothing. The crown embedded in his skull pulsed now with a heartbeat of its own. He could feel it speaking, not in words, but in urges, pulling at his spine, coiling through his thoughts like tendrils of smoke. Ascend. Be judged. Claim what you are owed. Together, they crossed the threshold. Inside, the temperature dropped. Not to cold, but to stillness. The air was inert. Every breath hung, unmoving. Braziers lined the walls, each burning not with flame, but with ghost light, green, blue, purple, colors that shifted when looked at too long. Theodore stepped onto the obsidian floor of the main hall. Not musically, but like a scream held just beneath the surface, vibrating against his boots. Every footstep echoed like thunder. Carvings along the walls depicted the rise and fall of rulers, some crowned in starlight, others crushed beneath it. At the far end stood a staircase leading up to a throne made of bone and mirrors. Upon it sat a figure cloaked in shadow. The judge. No name, no face, only eyes like white-hot moons, and hands that bled sand from their fingertips. "Step forward," the judge said. Theodore obeyed. "You seek to claim your right," the voice continued, echoing without echo. "To wear the crown of the Dustborn, to be the king of that which should never rule." "Yes," Theodore said. His voice wavered, but did not falter. The judge raised a hand. Serafina fell to her knees, gasping, blood pouring from her nose and ears. Theodore turned to her. "She cannot ascend," the judge said. "Only you, only one may wear the crown." "She's not a threat," he shouted. The judge gestured again. Chasm tore open in the floor. Serafina's body slid toward it, scraping, flailing. She tried to grab the edge, screaming his name, but the floor was slick with ichor. Theodore lunged, caught her hand. The crown on his head screamed in protest, flaring with searing light. His skull split with the pressure, but he pulled her back, inch by agonizing inch. The judge stood, and from its mouth came a roar, not sound, but memory, a flood of guilt, of failures. Every mistake Theodore had ever made poured into him like molten lead. He saw Nuln burning. He saw Jakob's mangled corpse. He saw Serafina's scorched face. He felt every soul that had died for him. He fell, but Serafina pulled him upright. "You're not just dust," she whispered through blood. "You're alive. Remember it." He staggered forward, up the steps, past the thrones of the fallen, past the bones of forgotten rulers. The judge placed a hand upon his forehead, and fire consumed him. Theodore screamed as his skin peeled away, replaced by symbols of judgment, his memories ripped apart, inspected by the unseen. His blood boiled into mist, his soul was flayed on a scaffold of divine reckoning. Then silence, and he was still. The crown no longer fought him. The throne no longer rejected him. He sat. The judge vanished. The temple went quiet. Seraphina reached him, tears mixing with blood, pointing to us sensibly. "Are you?" "I am," Theodore said. He looked at his hands. They glowed with power. The throne had made its decision. Now came the reckoning. Chapter 19. The Rise of the True Dynasty. The sands shook with the rhythm of resurrection. The moment Theodore emerged from the Temple of Final Judgment, the air itself changed. The wind carried a pulse, a thrum of power that reached even the deepest tombs. The sky above split, not with thunder or light, but with silence. The clouds parted to reveal the 7 stars still burning, now perfectly aligned in a circle, a serpent devouring its own tail. He walked with purpose, clothed not in armor, but in ancient regalia that materialized upon his flesh as he descended the black stone steps. Robes of gold-threaded silk fluttered behind him, untouched by the wind. Rings gleamed on his fingers, each one carved from the femurs of kings. The crown no longer hovered, it had fused. His eyes were twin emerald fires. Seraphina followed close behind, wounded but upright, her armor blackened and splattered, her blade now replaced by a staff plucked from the judge's temple. She no longer followed a scholar. She marched beside a king. Before them, the armies awaited, and so did the twin. He stood at the mouth of the Valley of Kings, upon a platform of bone. His mask had returned, but it now cracked with every breath, held together by hatred. Around him his legion formed ranks. War beasts pawed the sands, their hides scorched by endless spellfire. The undead priests flanking him hissed ancient incantations, their eyes rolling white as their king prepared for final war. Theodore raised his hand. Behind him the ground split, and from beneath the earth rose the Legion of the Nameless, those denied tombs, unremembered by history, cursed to wander in silence. Their bones glowed with inner fire. They bore no banners, no shields, only weapons of sheer vengeance. They poured forth in disciplined silence, a tidal wave of fury. The sky grew darker, and then the twin spoke, his voice carried by magic, infecting every ear. "You claim the throne, brother, but you wear it like a shroud. You were made to study, not to rule." Theodore stepped forward, his own voice booming, not through lungs, but through legacy. "You were meant to rule beside me, but you chose wrath. You chose damnation." "I chose justice," the twin roared. "Then come and take it," Theodore replied. The twin screamed, and the last battle began. It was not an orderly war. It was chaos, vile, divine, glorious chaos. Undead smashed into undead. The sky lit with spells that painted the clouds in fire and blood. Constructs fought like titans, brass serpents tearing Ushabti apart, limbs in stone raining. Chariots burst into flame mid-charge. Catapults hurled skulls wreathed in soulfire. Theodore and the twin met at the heart of the battlefield. They didn't speak. Their magic did the talking. The twin hurled tendrils of pure sorrow, memories twisted into blades. Theodore parried with raw time, aging the attacks into dust. They clashed and reality screamed. The sands melted beneath their feet. Obelisks shattered into clouds of glass. Every strike was a chapter of history written in agony. Seraphina carved her way toward them, breaking through guards of bone and shadow. She was wounded, bleeding from her scalp, but unstoppable. She reached the center just as the twin fired a bolt of necrotic energy at Theodore's heart. She stepped in front of it, took the blast full in the chest. She flew backward, body folding in mid-air, before crashing to the earth. Theodore's scream was not human. He unleashed the true power of the crown. The stars responded. Each one flared, then descended. 7 beams of celestial fire struck the battlefield, incinerating enemy after enemy. The twin staggered, shielding himself with a barrier of fallen souls. Theodore pushed forward, blade in hand, no longer a weapon, but an extension of judgment itself. He struck. The blade pierced the twin's chest, just below the crown of serpents carved into his armor. The twin gasped. For the first time there was no hate, only sadness. "You were supposed to be with me." "I still am," Theodore whispered, pressing his forehead to his twin's. Then he twisted the blade. A burst of light shattered the world. When it faded, only one figure stood. The crown glowed. The sands fell still, and the dead knelt. Chapter 20. Dust to Dust. The sun rose slowly, bleeding light across a horizon still littered with the corpses of the twice dead. It cast long, solemn shadows over the Valley of Kings, now a graveyard of shattered monuments and still burning bone. The wind was gentle for the first time in weeks, carrying no screams, no whispers, only the sighs of a desert trying to remember peace. Theodore stood at the heart of it. His robes, once gold, now hung in tatters, soaked with ash and blood. The crown on his head had fused completely, no longer a separate thing, but a calcified ring of starlight and bone growing from his skull like a fossilized curse. His hands dripped black. His eyes flickered with dying flame. The battlefield was his domain, and he was tired. Before him lay the broken form of his twin, what remained after the final light had ripped through him. The body was ash, yes, but within it were fragments of what had been, a scarred jawbone, a twisted rib, and, oddly, an unburned heart, still pulsing faintly in the dust. A remnant, a reminder. Theodore knelt beside it and pressed a hand to the warm organ, and wept. His tears were thick, like resin, falling slowly, dripping onto the cursed sand where blood had soaked for millennia. The desert drank it in silence. Behind him, Seraphina coughed. She lived. Early, wrapped in charred bandages, held upright by a half-mummified horse she'd stolen from the wreckage of the twins' command platform. Her eyes were tired, almost lifeless, but when she looked at Theodore, something else flickered. Respect, sorrow, and wariness. "You won," she rasped. "No," he whispered. "I finished." He rose slowly, his bones creaking like old timbers in a dying cathedral. And then he turned to face the throne. It still stood, impossibly, at the center of the ruined city. Not untouched, but unchallenged. The dead had ceased their march. They had fallen into repose, kneeling where they stood, heads bowed, as if the very act of death had at last become too heavy to rise again. He approached the throne. Each step was a battle. Each heartbeat echoed like a war drum in his ears. He reached the dais and stopped. The voice came again, not loud, not commanding. Inside, the judge. "You have done what none dared. You have broken the cycle." "I didn't come to rule," Theodore said. "I came to understand." "And what have you learned?" Theodore stared into the distance, at the carnage, at the ash, at the endless stretch of barren empire that had devoured itself time and again. That no crown is worth this. The throne pulsed, beckoning, but he turned away. The judge's whisper followed, "And so, the throne is yours, because you refuse it." The ground cracked. The heavens opened, not with fire, but light. Pure. White, the 7 stars blinked once more, then faded, one by one. The crown cracked. The pulse stopped. And in that silence, Theodore took the final step. He placed his palm on the ancient seat and whispered the rite of release. Ash to air, bone to silence, rule undone, oath unspoken. The throne disintegrated. With it, the power. The armies crumbled. One by one, the dead turned to dust. Not violently, peacefully. A sigh. A settling. Like closing a book. Even the twisted creatures of the twins' legion dissolved, their curses unbound, their agony absolved. The desert groaned, shifted, breathed. The curse was broken. Seraphina limped to Theodore's side as the throne vanished into the sand. She said nothing. He said less. But as they stood there, the only living things among the fallen, she finally asked, "For what now?" Theodore looked to the east. The wind picked up, and in its whisper came a single word. "Oh." Together they walked. Behind them, Libara's faded, its tombs swallowed again by time, its stories left for sand and scholars. And far, far above, in the cold stretch of forgotten stars, the circle was closed.